Half-Life is like the Jane Seymour of video games. Sure, it's a little bit rough around the edges and you can tell it's seen better days, but you also know that in its prime it was something worth paying attention to, and you'd give your left nut just to take it out for a nice seafood dinner. Throughout the years, Half-Life, along with games like Doom and Quake, has stayed active due to countless mods which has kept the community alive and kicking. Black Mesa, I think, has also played a pretty big part in keeping the original game so popular. In case you didn't know, Black Mesa is a remake of the original Half-Life developed by Crowbar Collective that's been in early access now on Steam for over 2 years. That's almost as long as it took Valve to develop the original Half-Life, and in all that time, all Crowbar Collective have supposed to have done is finish off the Zen levels, something which still eludes us. Now consider that the mod itself was in development for like 8 or 9 years before it was even released on Steam. I mean, I can remember first coming across it in around 2009 or 2010. And though lots of aspects of it have been changed throughout the years, the one thing that stayed true is how it's tried to update the original level design and some of the gameplay mechanics for a more modern demographic. Did they succeed? Well, yes and no. I originally took a look at the free-to-play mod, a version that was vastly different to what was released on Steam, and seeing as it's been almost 2 years now since I made that original video, I thought it'd be a good idea to go back now and take a look at how things have progressed. A lot of people commented on my original video saying that I was just upset that Black Mesa wasn't the original Half-Life and that I was making an unfair comparison. But I mean, not making a comparison to the original game is impossible. I mean, this is a remake based off one of the most influential FPS games of all time. I mean, you're not going to remake Citizen Kane or Gone with the Wind and not expect any kind of criticism either, are you? So if you're going to be upset that I'm spending a fair bit of this video comparing this remake to the source material it's based off, which I think is a perfectly valid comparison, then just stop watching right now. Otherwise, if you can handle that, then let's get right into it. Vital signs critical. It should go without saying, but Black Mesa is again that story about everyone's favourite theoretical physicist, Gordon Freeman, finding himself in the middle of a self-inflicted resonance cascade that basically turns the Black Mesa Research Facility into a war zone as humans and aliens battle for survival, with Gordon caught in the middle simply trying to escape. From the bowels of the facility, you'll reach the surface and eventually explore the alien home planet of Zen, still to be released, and defeat the alien leader. It's a simple story and one that's told entirely through the player's perspective with no cinematics or any moments when you're not in control of the action. It worked back in 1998 and it works now in 2017.
They're waiting for you, Gordon, in the test chamber.
What Black Mesa's tried to do though is re-envision the game and make it feel like more of a palpable place, updating the visual fidelity whilst trying to keep the feeling of Half-Life's world intact, as well as making numerous changes to the level design and the layout of environments, which I guess they've deemed as improvements. And look, it works well initially. Picking up the shotgun, crossbow, the Colt Python and so forth for the first time is great, as is walking through familiar areas and exploring that little new room tucked away in the corner that wasn't there before. Take a hit from a bull squid's projectile and it remains in your character model for a short period of time. The concussive blast from a hound's eye now affects your vision more dynamically, and you'll notice how fire can set off the sprinkler system in the office complex. These are factors that work off that nostalgic sense of deja vu whilst offering up subtle improvements to remind you that it's been made in the current year. Never does Black Mesa ever try to force your hand. You're free to explore the game world at your own pace, uncovering new areas of the facility at your leisure and using all the tools at your disposal in any order and manner that you wish. This was something the first game had down to an art form, and Black Mesa has really managed to carry that across. The main thing it's changed, as I said, is the way it's redesigned a lot of these areas that you move through. And this is where the whole thing really starts to fall apart. I mean, this redesigning aspect has also had its shortcomings, and a lot of the environments in the game simply don't work as well as they did in the original Half-Life. Take the area in We've Got Hostiles as an example, when you've just come up that elevator and have to take on a small group of Marines before you head underground again. Now, in the original game, this was a small combat area packed with lots of crates and providing lots of cover for the player. In Black Mesa, the layout is still the same in essence, but now there's very little between you and the starting positions of the Marines, meaning that almost cat and mouse approach you could take in the original, popping around corners and even flanking the AI, has been reduced to both you and the Marines just kinda taking pot shots at one another from long range. Yeah, it looks good and it's way bigger, but it's completely lost the sense of balancing and that structural layout that encourages open-ended combat. And as I've been telling my girlfriend for the past 6 years now, it's not the size, it's how you use it. Later in the game, during the surface tension chapter, there's another bit where you can ambush a bunch of Marines after coming out of these tunnels, and yet in Black Mesa, during the same segment, they're all alerted to your presence from the get-go. That choice of being able to choose an entry point out of the half dozen or so available and choose how to initiate combat has just been removed entirely. Other chapters like Questionable Ethics now feels entirely different. What was originally this very action-packed chapter where you're getting into combat almost every time you turn a corner has now become something of a lonely slog through mostly empty corridors and office spaces, as the vastly increased size of the environments means you're engaging with enemies far less frequently. You can tell they've tried to rectify this by including a huge combat sequence at the end of the chapter in the lobby, as guys burst through the ceiling and you're ambushed from a nearby doorway, and yet this area wasn't really designed with this encounter in mind, and as a result, it doesn't play out all that well. Black Mesa is packed with these kind of moments where you'll recognize the area that you're in that's been recreated and often marvel at just how good it looks, but then quickly notice how much less enjoyable the ensuing gameplay is because of the slight alterations they've made. I think it's funny that the times I enjoyed myself the most was during the levels where they'd altered the architecture the least, and that's not because I'm blinded by nostalgia, it's because Valve knew what the fuck they were doing when it came to level design. Now look, Sunny Jim, it ain't all that bad. To be fair, there are areas in the game that are vastly improved. As it was in the original game and still is with Black Mesa, surface tension is easily the highlight of the entire game. This is the chapter where you're finally back on the surface and moving around the complex, avoiding both the aliens and the military who are often in constant skirmishes with one another. Some of the new scripted sequences they've added in, where you're able to spectate these large-scale battles between both groups, are just incredible to watch. And you've got the choice to pick off stragglers or simply just use the fighting as a distraction and slip by unnoticed. Throughout Forget About Freeman, you'll frequently see alien ships in the Air Force getting into little dogfights in the air, which is a really nice little touch as well. But isn't it funny that the moments like this when you're not forced into combat are the best moments in the game? And you want to know the reason for why that is? Well, here's the dark little secret, and what I think most people are too scared to admit, is that the shooting in all of the Half-Life games has never really been that good. Either the Gold Source engine or the Source engine, especially against human enemies. The intelligence of the enemy AI being able to flank, retreat, and lob grenades your way has made the combat more dynamic, but the actual shooting mechanics themselves are the absolute bare bones. Put your crosshair on something and press the left mouse button to hit it, and stay out of an enemy's line of sight to avoid damage. Now, that's not to say that Half-Life 1 and 2 are bad, because they're not, but my point is that when people look back and talk about how amazing these games were, they're going to be doing it talking about the narrative, or the way the game world is laid out, or the progression of weapons throughout the story, and the seamless transition between environments. Some of the best moments in Half-Life 2, for instance, the introductory sequence arriving in City 17, the chapters on the airboat, on the highway, and in Ravenholm are all completely light, if not absent entirely, on shooting with standard weapons. I mean, I'd argue that Ravenholm can be finished by using physics items and the gravity gun alone. The best part of Water Hazard when you're avoiding that chopper is when you're being chased through the narrow tunnels and dodging bits of debris in the water. The actual part when you're required to shoot the damn thing down is boring and monotonous. And it's not that the shooting is bad, it was just never anything more than the bare minimum it had to be, and the fact that everything else in between having to shoot things was so solid, we kind of overlooked it. Likewise, the shooting in Black Mesa just feels average. I mean, it's all kind of floaty and not really that responsive. The Marines, for instance, behave just like reskinned Combine, which becomes abundantly clear if you've spent more than 15 minutes with Half-Life 2 after fighting the very first Marine you encounter in Black Mesa. About the one saving grace with Black Mesa's shooting is that there's now actual location-based damage. And a well-placed headshot, especially from the Colt Python, can kill Marines and, more importantly, tougher enemies like the alien grunts in a single hit. It's a shame that none of the other weapons feel all that good nor seem to visually indicate that you're really doing all that much damage. Shoot an enemy with the shotgun and watch how they barely react to getting hit until you deal that killing blow and they humorously ragdoll to the ground like a bag of shit. The crossbow just feels off, and the reload time seems to be longer than the original. Likewise, the alternate fire for the pistol and the shotgun somehow feel less effective, and the physics for thrown grenades and the alternate fire grenade from the MP5 has also been tampered with. Some of these changes are good and some of them are bad, but my point is that still 2 years after it was a free-to-play mod, despite numerous changes and whatever the hell else they've added in, Black Mesa just can't recapture what made the original Half-Life so good. It sure as hell, like I said, doesn't improve the shooting, and the at times complete restructuring of the level design to make the environment feel more realistic has often come at the expense of the balancing and the pacing they often manage to achieve with those admittedly archaic layouts. I mean, yeah, sure, on a rail dragged on a little bit too long for its own good, but every corridor, corner, staircase, and thoughtfully placed item was put in its place for a very specific and well thought out reason. I think the ultimate issue with Black Mesa is that it doesn't know if it wants to be a remake or a reboot. It takes a lot of liberties with the environments and the way certain weapons handle, the way enemies behave and all that kind of stuff, but then it still wants to stay true to a lot of the other elements of Half-Life's original design. What you end up with is this weird mix of the old and the new, which often doesn't quite gel together. And it's like what I said in my original video, how I think the fact this has garnered so much praise is that they managed to pull the whole thing off in the first place. Going through and completely updating every single location from the original game and trying to make it work again is a humongous task. Humongous. And yes, I understand that people who worked on this are probably doing it for free and they have their own lives to live and jobs and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean you should overlook the shortcomings. I've got to say though, despite the problems I had with the layouts of certain areas, I can't deny that this is a phenomenal looking game at times. They've just done a bang up job with some of these environments, especially the later areas like Surface Tension and Forget About Freeman. Some of the updated weapon models look fantastic, as do most of the NPCs, aside from a couple dodgy looking ones here and there. My favourite is the redesigned glue-on gun, which just makes you feel pretty much unstoppable whenever you're using it. I have no idea what the future holds for Black Mesa. They've been saying Zen is going to be finished what feels like an eternity, and the end of year is currently set as the release date. But I've always thought that the Zen levels were the weakest aspects of Half-Life's original campaign, so I genuinely don't give two shits whether or not this comes to pass. And that might be one portion of the game that will be objectively improved if it gets redesigned. The campaign peaks around questionable ethics and Surface Tension, as I said before, where it's truly at the best it's ever going to get, showcasing some of the best old school level design you're ever going to see. And if you're like me and just want to see how those sections play out in the updated engine, then you'll probably get your money's worth. But the whole thing is practically finished as it is, so don't expect any gigantic changes from here on out. The eventual inclusion of these absent Zen chapters isn't going to change the 7 or 8 hours beforehand that it takes you to get up to that point. And if you buy the game in its current state, you'll end up getting this anyway when it's finally finished. I would say if you're a fan of the Half-Life games, then picking up Black Mesa is a no-brainer. But if you were like me and hoping for it to genuinely improve a lot of the aspects of the original, well, you're going to be disappointed. But look, I am if nothing more a horrible shill when it comes to indie devs, and when push comes to shove, I'd ultimately recommend the whole thing because it's still an amazing accomplishment despite its shortcomings. It may have issues, but it still does encapsulate everything that makes old school shooters so enjoyable. It's just a shame that it couldn't truly improve and capitalize on that.